Hi everybody. I want to go through creating a login for Instagram. First thing you want to do is get to your directory on Unix where you have all your files. And you should see something there called login.html. We're going to be eventually putting some Java code into this, so you want to rename this or copy this to login.jsp. So you could say copy login.html to login.jsp. I've already done this, so I won't have to do that twice. You want to have a window open for Unix for all your stuff. Additional windows you want to have open are Text Wrangler. So Text Wrangler sort of allows you to modify files without having to use regular expressions and inside of Vim and Emacs and those type of things. It's a simpler editor, it's not as powerful as an editor, but it's a simpler editor. So the way you do this, you'll put up Text Wrangler, and then you say open from FTP server. So this is saying open all your files from the comp sci machine. So open, and then I'm already configured. And so now I have all access to all my files on the comp sci machine. The next thing you want to do is have Pancakes open so that you can look inside of your database to see if there's a reason why your program isn't running. Let's see, I think that's it. So, and the browser, you want to have a browser open. I like Chrome because of the debugging tools that are inside of it. So here's login.jsp, which is the same thing as login.html, as I was saying. So let's take a quick look at the code. View, developer, view source. And so what I'm looking for is a form tag. So angle form. And here is the form tag. So there's the opening, and then down here, here's the closing. So a form is just like what you think it is whenever you're buying a book on Amazon, or maybe booking a flight on Expedia, or whatever. A form is wherever you're going to see boxes or radio buttons or checkboxes or drop downs or anything like that. So this particular form has two fields, one for user ID and one for password right here. And as it is right now, I've already modified this. So this particular line says, when a person clicks on the button, where's it going to go? So I have mine going to something called select example. So what that's intent on is it's a piece of code that retrieves user ID and password based on two parameters, user ID and password. Now, if you look at your code for this, you won't see name equals username or name equals password. You're going to have to put those in. And so, of course, you can use whatever variable names you want. Just know that those two variables you're going to be using to retrieve that data as it's passed into the receiving program, select.example. So you might just want to write those down after you've created them. Okay. I think it's good to be consistent between the HTML variable names and the Java variable names and the database variable names, but you certainly don't have to do that. You do need to know what they're called. So let's take a look at the code that's going to receive this in the program called select example. So these are templates that I've given you to sort of co-opt and sort of fit for your own needs. So let's take a look at that inside of Text Wrangler. So this is the original select example. That is the one that I've given you. So you can see that this is receiving two variables. These are HTML variables. So one would be username, and the other would be password. So I'd have to go into those programs and change this for it says parameter 1 to username and this one to password. And then I could leave these variable names the same, P1 and P2, but they're not very descriptive, so I probably would change those to username and password. And then from there, this line is just for debugging purposes. If you get stuck and you're wondering why, you can see why by throwing the variables to the screen. And then a query to retrieve the data from the, key from the database. I want to show you the code that ends up, this is a template as I was saying, but I'll give you an example of my code going through. So my particular one says read in the username, read in the password, and I put those into two variables called P1 and P2. Then I'm constructing a query. So this is a string, of course, but I have to put in some parameters. That is to say, who's logged in. So P1 is whoever set their username, and P2 is the password, and then this is constructed. You'll notice this is a string. So eventually the program we're going to call is going to take a string as a parameter. So this is all hard-coded, and then quotes have to surround it. That's exactly the way it looks inside of Pancakes. If we slide over to Pancakes, you'll see it right there. See the quotes around those? So you have to construct those. Okay, now we're back again. So here's the query. If we were running it, we would say select query from users where username is equal to X and password is equal to Y. And then this is also for debugging purposes. It's really helpful to know how to debug inside of Java server pages because you're compiling a program through a browser. So the only way there is no console per se, so your Chrome or Firefox or whatever you're using is going to be your console. Okay, this chunk of code here is how to connect to the database. Now this is not your Unix password, this is your MySQL password. So 3306 is the port of the database, so that's my database. And then here's the username, and then here's the password for mine. And so what happens is you're essentially connecting to the database and then putting the information inside of what's called a result set. So RS is very much like this. So if we slipped over to Pancakes and I ran this query, the output would appear on the screen. Oops, got an error. It's like users from users where username equals Jack, password equals can't be. Content, Jack, happy. One second. Well, I can't tell why that's not running. Here we are. So this is the result set. Now this could of course be multiple rows and multiple columns, but there is no sort of result set visual inside of your Java program. So what you have to do is iterate through it. So if this had, say, a list of 10 flavors of ice cream, you'd have to sort of loop down chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, etc., etc., etc. So the way you do that is to create an iterator, a loop. So in this particular case, where it says user ID equals 1, the information is going back into a pointer called RS. And that pointer sits right on the top, right before user ID. And then it's for you to sort of whittle your way down. So here's the while loop that says move through the loop. Move through the results. Now, RS next, and the next returns a Boolean. So if it's not true, that is to say, if there is no data in the result set, it won't run. So it's either true or it's false, which led me to create a Boolean here saying was data found. This particular line here says go to the pointer, that is to say, go to Pancakes, and then retrieve a variable called user ID. Now user ID is what you're choosing up here inside of the select statement. So it's going to be peeling off that column, and then it puts it into a variable called pkey. Now I know this particular query is only going to run once. So if it finds data, it'll place it into pkey, and pkey is the primary key for the user who's logged in. And once you have that, you kind of have everything. Okay. Next, I move down and say, if there was a primary key found, then go to the next page. This is the sort of welcome page for Instagram. Now, I don't have to put this long URL in here, but I want to make that sort of just clear that we're going to another program, and it's called index.jsp, which will list of all the sort of pictures of the people you're following. And then response and redirect says now go there. So I'm building a string of where to go, and then response says, okay, go forward. And the last thing I want to talk about for a second is called a session variable. So a session variable has to do with variable scope. It allows you to create a variable and put it to the RAM chip of the server. And so this says, gives you the ability to jump between screens, any screen that you want, and then retrieve it per variable. So in this particular case, the variable is called pkey, and then I'm setting another variable called pkey, but the difference is this one is local, that is to say inside of this program, and this one is global to all of the programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in class, so I'm going to move on here for a second. However, if it does not work, that is to say, if it doesn't find the primary key, then I want to go back to the original program and tell the user there was a problem. So you can see here, this is another way of passing variables between programs. I go back to the original page, and then I create a variable called message, MSG, and concatenate a string on there that will be retrieved in the login program. We'll go to that in a second. I just want to point out that this is in the wrong place. This should be done up here, because after you've left, it wouldn't, that instruction wouldn't run because you've already left the program. And then sort of that's it. Okay, so we're inside of select example here, and a moment ago I had said to you that if it comes to be that the user isn't found, then you want to send a message back to login JSP and say there was a problem. So let's take a quick look at login JSP. So login JSP is an HTML program. It's the login page. But if you put on the extension JSP, it now becomes a Java program and allows you to use variables. In this particular case, I need to pull in the error message and say there was a problem, and I put it into a variable called error message. And then down here, this is the way you can embed a variable inside of HTML. So you notice here it says angle percent equal error message percent angle. And this is me sort of dumping in an error message inside of login. I'll show you how this works in a second in runtime. I just want to point out here one thing. There's a try block in here. So the try is open with a brace, and then it closes down at the bottom. And the reason this has to be is I can't reference a variable without a try block. So this is normal HTML sitting inside of a Java program, and the way that the compiler can delineate between what's a program and what's not is the sentinel. So when these sentinels exist, that means Java is now running. And then down here, this is another sort of sentinel, say this is a Java variable sitting inside of HTML. So let me show you how this works. So if I go over to login and I type in some bad credentials, I'm just typing at random here.